Let's try this. There we go. Hello and welcome everyone to another Sectors Made Simple webinar. I'm pleased to be here with you all today, not for a subsector spotlight, but a slightly different topic, but one that I think will be incredibly interesting for everyone. Now, a lot of this is going to be storytelling and a lot of this is going to be us playing some games. But there's going to be a lot of amazing information that I have to share with you all in this webinar. So I hope you all have your thinking caps on because today is going to have lots of audience participation. So hope you're ready and along for the ride because this is going to be an awesome webinar on a topic called lateral thinking. So let's get straight into the action here. First, let's say hello to everyone that we have with us. Again, if you're watching these recorded, we do these webinars live every Friday at 4 p.m. Los Angeles time, 7 p.m. New York time. So, hello Emelida, Blaze, Lucia, Maria, Iris, Euro, great to see you, it's been a while. My mother, Delia, S. Rivers, that's a new name. Bienvenidos a nuestro webinario. Veronica S., Grisel, Eddie, Andrew, Gloria, Blanca, Kike, Yesenia, Josefina, and many, many more. Thank you all so much for being here. Let's get right into the presentation and the fun. So today's topic is called lateral thinking. Now, let's start off by talking about what lateral thinking is. Lateral thinking, or sometimes it's called divergent thinking, is a way of thinking about how to solve a problem. Many times we are faced with something that we need to figure out what to do. And unlike a test in school, oftentimes there's not answer A, B, C, and D, pick the one that's correct. And even less so, do we actually get to know if that answer is right or wrong? We kind of just have to live with whatever the results are. So lateral thinking's a little bit different because when looking at a problem, most people are just going to think about the first answer that comes to mind. You know how when you were in school, someone probably told you, go with your gut because your first answer is usually the best answer. Lateral thinking says otherwise. Lateral thinking, we go beyond the obvious answer, and instead, we look at all of the different answers that we can possibly have. And what this does is it allows us to find a little bit more creative answers. Now, they might not be the very, very best answer, but it gives us more choices to choose from. Whereas other times, it's going to lead us to the correct answer when the obvious answer is actually incorrect. Now, for some reason, this one got a little wonky, so I'm just going to go ahead and show you both sides here. On the left is normal thinking, or what's called convergent thinking. You're given a maze that you have to find your way from point A to point B. The first thing a person is going to do when they get given this is they're going to start trying to find their way through it. Do I go this way? No. Do I go? Yep, okay. We go this way. Oh, made a wrong turn. Go back. And they're going to try and find the path through the maze. Lateral thinking's a little different. We think outside the box. Mostly it's figuratively. We're not talking a literal box, but in this case, yeah, we're talking a literal box. You can go through the maze, yeah, or you can just go around it. There's no rule saying you have to go through the maze. The rule is just get from point A to point B. Now, some of you are probably looking at this and saying, all right, smart Alec, why are you doing this? It's because when there's no concrete rules, which in life, there's very seldom concrete rules. Yes, there's laws and there are regulations that we need to follow, but when it comes to solving a problem in your everyday life, most of the time the rules are things that you or someone else has just said. They're not real rules, And oftentimes, there is a difference between rules and assumptions. Rules are something that you need to follow. Assumptions are something that you just think that it's a rule, when in reality, there's nothing saying you can't just go around the maze to get from A to B. So this is a very, very clear example of what lateral thinking is, and in a single picture, a great depiction of what it is. But why is it important? So divergent thinking or lateral thinking is incredibly important because often this is what we think of as creativity. Creativity oftentimes is lateral thinking. It's a way of explaining how well a person thinks laterally. How crazy are the ideas they come up with? Now, as students, lateral thinking allows us to come up with creative topics for papers or writing a college application letter. This second point right here is huge. So if you are a student going through middle school, high school, or wherever, or if you're a parent with a kid that's going to college soon, this is an important skill to learn because college admissions officers, the people who read your application, often they require that you write a paper saying a little bit about yourself, a way of showing who you are. They've read 50 million papers on your dreams and aspirations to become an astronaut and all of that, right? That's not going to stand out to them. A person thinking about the topic divergently or laterally is going to come up with a much more creative topic. They're going to come up with something that few, if any, people have written about. So when the admissions officer is reading that paper, right away they're going to say, whoa, I haven't heard of something like this before. I haven't read this topic before, or I haven't read this approach to it. It doesn't even need to be the topic is new. It can just be a different way of looking at the same problem everyone else has. I can't tell you how important it is when you're applying to college to stand out. And having the ability to think and write in a lateral thinking and divergent manner is an amazing way of differentiating yourself as an applicant. But divergent thinking isn't just for school. As employees or as workers or even as business owners, it allows us to come up with better business ideas that others may not think about. They make an assumption that the boss may not like it. They may make an assumption that, oh, that will never work. Why? Who said it won't work? Why won't it work? Thinking in a divergent way is an amazing method to finding solutions or finding product ideas that no one else has thought of, maybe because many others have thought about it, but just said, oh, no one would ever want that, or oh, that's silly. Some of the best ideas are silly. I want to use the example here of SpaceX. SpaceX had a mission, a goal, to make a rocket reusable. Launch something up into space and bring it back down in one piece so it can be used again. They had two approaches for this. Rapid prototyping, which is a way of saying they built a lot of rockets, and instead of saying on a very small scale what will happen, they just said, all right, let's just build it for real, launch it, and if it blows up, we figure out why it blew up. So that's one, not being afraid to fail. But not being afraid to fail also applies to divergent thinking. It's the way of saying, well, your way is a little silly because it's the first way you thought about. Let's think of some other creative ways to do it. And not saying those ideas are dumb and just moving on. It's saying, All right, let's see where this goes. Launching it up, having it go boom, and then saying, all right, maybe not so much. Idea number 2, going to that and seeing, does this work? So them taking dozens of different ideas of how to take a rocket, something that's been very well known for the past 50 years, launching it up into the sky and figuring out how to make it land in one piece, that takes divergent and lateral thinking. That takes the ability to think outside the box and come up with ideas and suggestions and ways of approaching the problem no one else has. Now, as teachers, because whether we like it or not, everyone here is a student as much as they are a teacher. So this applies to you all as well. It allows us to come up with fun ways of making the information that we teach be relatable. It might help us with coming up with analogies or ways of saying, well, think of the problem like it's a car going down the highway. Those kinds of creative examples help to bring something new into something that's known, something relatable, something people are familiar with. So by using divergent thinking, it becomes very, very easy to think of different ways of explaining the same problem beyond just explaining the problem. Make it relatable, make it interesting, but most importantly, make it fun. Now, we all might be employees or workers or owners or students or teachers, but there's one thing that we all are here: investors. So as investors, lateral thinking allows us to go beyond the 1 or 2 stocks or strategies that are easy, that are familiar, that are safe. And it allows us to explore all of the possibilities of what we could invest in, how we could invest in it, and how we look at the market and the economy as a whole. That's the value. That's why divergent thinking is important. But why is this probably the first time you've ever heard these words? Divergent thinking or lateral thinking? Pretty simple. It's rarely taught. Divergent thinking is a skill, and it is a skill that is not easy to teach because often it requires a very one-on-one approach with a student. It requires talking to the person, figuring out how do they think and how can I make them think more creatively. And for a teacher who has dozens, if not hundreds of students, when papers or projects are incredibly different, when the projects are meant to be exercises in divergent thinking, it becomes incredibly time-consuming to grade. So as a teacher, the system doesn't want them to get creative with what they teach and how they teach it. There's a certain way you do things because the thing you need to do is pass the SATs, get high standardized test scores because that means you have a high IQ, and high IQ is the only thing that matters, right? Wrong. Welcome to the real world. In reality, school focuses on teaching us how to manage our time, but also how just to memorize information to later barf it up on a test. That's not useful, all right? This is a thing called convergent or linear thinking. It involves just taking a question with multiple known answers and going through them and converging on the one right answer. That's exactly how school works. And that's exactly how an IQ test works. On IQ tests, they are going to give you a bunch of questions. There's always 4 answers. 1 of them is right, 3 of them is wrong. And at the very end of the test, they give you 1 number to tell you how smart you are. Congratulations. If you score over an 140, congrats, you're a genius. If you score below that, better luck next time. But that's not how intelligence works. That's not how the real world works. Tell me the last time that in a job or in your real life, you were given 4 possible answers and you had to decide which one was the right one. And if you can give me an example of that, I'm curious to see if you actually got to find out if your answer was right or wrong. Because there are very few situations in the world where we'll be given the question and the 4 answers, and then we need to figure out which one's the right one using convergent thinking, and also you get to know if your answer was right or wrong with a grade. That doesn't happen. That rarely happens, because if someone already knows the answer, why are they asking you? Why are they trying to see if you know something they already know? And yes, there is always going to be a case where that is applicable, where that matters. But in most jobs, it really doesn't. In most jobs, convergent thinking is useless. Yeah, if you're in biotech or some chemistry field or aviation, there's a lot of memorization. But most jobs, they don't require memorization. Questions can be Googled, help articles on the internet can be followed, and mostly you can ask a coworker or a friend for help, advice, or to answer a question. School simply just does not teach us to think laterally. They teach us to think linearly. So I want to give an example using psychology. This is not something that I came up with. This is something that has been established. But we're going to look at why school actually makes us dumber by using a brick and a blanket. Malcolm Gladwell is a very, very famous author. And in one of his books, Outliers, that entire book discusses skills and knowledge that he considers to be the most important factors for success. Not in a career, not on a test, success in life. There is a lot more to life than just a test in school. There's a lot more to life than what college you go to. There's a lot more in life than the job you hold. So, in this book, he discusses all of that. Now, in his list of skills, divergent thinking is one of his top skills. In this book, he uses an example of giving people a test to see how many uses they can find for a normal household thing. And then, from there, we can rank people based on the number of uses that they thought of. So, audience participation time. I'm going to give you all 3 minutes from the time that I get to the end of this slide. And we're going to come up with all of the uses we can think of for a brick and a blanket. You can use one, you can use both. Doesn't matter. I want you to think of every single use that you can think of for a brick and or a blanket. And at the end, we're going to count them all up. So, go. Let me know how many uses you can think of. All right, I'll give you all 1 more minute on this. Alrighty, so I'm gonna call it right there. I've been reading some of the responses in the chat and they are hysterical because none of you said to build a house. None of you said to keep you warm when you're sleeping. There was, we can use them for a picnic. There was one that you can use it for exercise. There was one that you can break windows. Um, there's lots. There's lots of creative answers, and that's awesome to see. Because once you get past the obvious, you can keep yourself warm with it, or you can build a building with it. You get really creative. You can use a blanket to hide your mess if you don't feel like cleaning up your room. You can use a brick as a poor man's fishing rod. You can use a brick as a paperweight. You can use the brick to hold down the blanket at a picnic, a hammock. You can use it to play tug of war with your dog. There's so many uses that we can think of for a brick and a blanket. So this fun little game helps us to show something incredibly, incredibly interesting. It shows that school doesn't really make us smarter. There was not a single part of this test that school has ever covered. School has never taught you the uses for a brick or a blanket. You had to come up with that on your own. There was no right or wrong answer. There was just answers. And that's the beauty. The minute you no longer are worried about the answer being right or wrong and you just say it because it could be, that's a good answer. That's a right answer here. Just like an IQ test sets genius at a certain level, there was a researcher that took what Gladwell did and wanted to apply it to this test. So what he did was he gave the brick and a blanket experiment to a bunch of people, to kindergartners, to people in middle school, high school, undergrads in college, and PhD graduates. And he set a certain level, like they do on an IQ test, to be genius. What do you all think the kindergartners scored? How many of the kindergartners do you think scored genius levels on this test? Blanket to carry my cat. Yes, we call that a burrito. Well, try this. 97% of the kids that were given this test were geniuses, according to this figure. How many of the PhD holders do you think got genius levels? Keep in mind, PhDs require 4 years in an undergrad degree, 2 to 3 years in a graduate degree, and God knows how long on your PhD. Coming up with your thesis, coming up with the topic, writing the paper, defending the paper, getting it approved. It takes years. How many kids? I didn't say the number, I was just looking for a percentage. I don't remember the actual number. But 97% of them. So, when this test was given to PhD holders, only 7% got that same genius level that the 97% of kindergartners got. 90% less scored well on this test. That is ridiculous. That is not some rounding error. That's not they got given a different test. They got asked, think of the uses you can find for a brick or a blanket. That's it. And kindergartners destroyed the PhDs. The PhDs got beaten by everyone else, but it was a straight line from kindergarten, middle school, high school, undergrad, PhD. So why did I just take the time to have you all tell me the uses for a brick and a blanket? Chances are you're never going to need to worry about that. But I'm explaining all of this to show you that one of the most important skills in life is a skill that very, very, very few schools actually teach. There's only one school that I know of that has used divergent and lateral thinking as part of their studies, has actually created a test, a project around lateral thinking. There was a school on the East Coast that gave their students a class project. They were studying in their natural science class about the importance of picking up your trash and how your trash affects the planet. So their project was to come up with a plan for the city to better clean up the trash on their streets and on their highways, make their city more beautiful, but also improve the environment of the city, protect any wildlife and animals. This was an amazing example because it wasn't write a paper about the importance of cleaning up your trash. It's no, we know trash is bad. Congratulations, that's not something new. What's new is what do we do about it? How do we fix the problem? There is no right or wrong answer when it comes to fixing a problem that we don't know the answer to. If we don't know the answer, how do we know if our answer is right or wrong? So that's exactly what these students did. They tried to come up with an answer to a question that nobody knew the answer to. And what happened was after all of the students turned in their projects, the city council, the city hall, got together and they voted on the project that they thought was the best. And the winning project was actually used by the city as part of their initiative to clean up the streets and make the environment a better place for people, animals, and everyone. This here is an example of how a lesson that you learn in a classroom can also be used to train and teach lateral thinking. It was a way of getting the students involved where they're not just reciting something that they already know the answer to and they're just proving they either know the answer or memorized it, or they Googled it because they couldn't be bothered to read the book. This is an amazing example. This right here is divergent thinking in action, not just for the student's gain, but causing and creating a real world benefit. Those students now not only are working on building this skill, but they're making a difference in their community, a place where they will see the results of their hard work. That's an amazing way to teach an incredibly valuable lesson, in my opinion. So, if you don't go to that one school that did this project one time, how do we learn how to think laterally? How do we practice lateral thinking? Like most skills, it takes practice. It takes repetition and it takes a lot of creativity. And it's like a muscle. We have to work it out to make it stronger. Now, usually, when it comes to education, that's why we have school. School is supposed to help us to exercise our brain and make us smarter. But because lateral thinking is not something that is very commonly taught in schools, it's up to us to train and practice at home. I was lucky enough in high school to have a teacher, Mr. Maxon, that was the first time that I found out about the words lateral thinking, and what he taught us about was divergent thinking. That's where I learned about the brick and blanket. That's where I learned about the PhDs failing a test that kindergarteners almost universally passed. But that wasn't the first time I'd practiced it. What I didn't realize at the time, and what I didn't figure out until years later, when I realized that not everyone thinks laterally, is that I had been practicing lateral thinking for most of my life. You just don't realize it. It's a skill that you just learn, that you don't need to sit down and put in 2 hours in front of a piano to practice. It's something that is a mindset. It's a way of thinking that becomes pervasive in everything you do. So what I discovered was, while I didn't know what the word was, my parents were teaching me lateral thinking, whether I realized it or not. So I want to share with you some of these ways that my parents shared with me and tried to teach me about lateral thinking, whether I knew it at the time or not. I attribute a lot of my way of thinking, how I approach problems, and the solutions that I discover to these fun examples that never felt like I was working out. It just felt like a game, because it is. It is just a game. Any book about lateral thinking, that book Outliers is a great resource for it. Let me do a little bit of research for you. I can send an email or post it on Facebook what I'm able to find. Because, yeah, I would love to find some more resources, but really, if you have the creativity and the drive, coming up with your own examples is honestly more fun, because if you read how someone else has taught themselves, you're different. You are you. You know the things you enjoy, and finding something that you enjoy and learning through that is important. Funny enough, many video games are a great way to practice lateral thinking, because there's not one solution that is the best solution. The solution changes all the time. The solution changes depending on how you play the game or whatever it might be. So you could say video games are a good lateral thinking exercise. But if video games are not your thing, and maybe investing is, researching strategies and creating your own strategies, or analyzing the market to figure out, I'm going to get into the investment section later, but you kind of get what I mean here. Yes, gaming is actually a very good exercise in lateral thinking. Sorry, parents, hate to break it to you. Anyway, gaming was last week, lateral thinking is this week. The methods that I'm about to talk about were exercises for me, but also for my mom, for my dad. These are incredibly useful for adults as well, because the fact is, you're never too old or too young to be creative and to have fun. So, quick story before we get into some of these games. I grew up in Los Angeles, and on the way to the airport, you have to take the 405 freeway through the canyon, and on the right side of the highway as you're driving to the airport, there's this really, really, really big pole. And it's covered with camouflage paint. So whenever we would drive by, one of my favorite parts of the drive, because there's not many parts of the drive that are fun, it's just a lot of traffic, our game would be think of 5 ways that they could have painted that pole. Now, maybe lateral thinking is like thinking outside the box. Exactly. If someone says think outside the box, that means lateral thinking. If you're thinking inside the box, that is linear thinking. But to this example, think of 5 ways you could have painted that pole. I tried finding a picture of it, but I wasn't able to, sadly. So imagine a big 100-foot tall pole painted completely in camouflage. The first and obvious answer you're probably thinking about, they laid it down on the ground, painted it, and then lifted it up. That's boring. That's linear. Once you get past the obvious answer, that's when the creativity and the game kind of gets into this. So I'm just going to give you some of my favorite answers that I had throughout the years. Some of my favorites that I came up with, or my mom came up with, were someone climbed up the pole like a tree cutter would. So they lifted themselves up one bit at a time and painted it all by hand. Another one was, instead of climbing up the pole, they had someone go down from a helicopter and be held in kind of in a cradle by the helicopter as they painted it. Or, instead of having them paint it, they just took a bunch of stickers and peeled off the sticker, stick the sticker onto the post, and move on. Another less fun but also viable example is, instead of painting it, they just used a bunch of different colored metals. And then probably my favorite one is just imagining some kid sitting at the bottom with an RC car and a little paintbrush attached to the RC helicopter and a little paintbrush attached to it. So they flew it up like a little drone and painted around the post until it was done. This is a silly example. This is not something that you're going to be able to drive down your street and say, hey, how would they paint that pole? But this is just a small example. That pole was not some monument. It wasn't some tourist destination, and it wasn't some crazy thing. It was a random pole that they decided to paint. And they decided to paint it camouflage. I've seen other telephone poles or communications towers that are painted and dressed up like palm trees. This is a kind of game that you can play with many different things around you and in your life. Now, for probably my favorite game, and one I'm going to show you all right now. We're going to play a few rounds together. Kira, you're going to get involved. It's Kira participation time. So, this is probably my favorite game for lateral thinking, and you can play it sitting around the dinner table with your family. It's called the What Is This Object game. What you do is you go around the house and you find something weird. Something you might already know the use for, maybe not even know the use for, but something just weird. And then you'll pass it around thinking of the different things that the object could be. So we're going to, again, do an example here. And we're going to look at an object. I'm going to hold it up to the camera. I'll show you a little bit about what it is, and then we're going to think of some different uses for it. Now, the fun part about this is when you're playing it with your family, you're going to get the boring, normal answers out of the way pretty quickly. Once you get past the first round and you can't say the same thing someone else said, that's when things get creative. I've had rounds of this game with my family that go on for 30, 45 minutes of people just coming up with the craziest uses for these things. So, what could this thing be? It's a little circular thing.
Why don't you show your full
It
face?
spins around. What?
Show your full face.
What do you mean?
Actually, no, on the screen without the.
Oh, yeah, great idea.
Easier.
Ta-da! It's this little thing. It spins. What are all the uses you can think of for this little guy? Chapstick? Yeah, I could see that. A ball? Most definitely. Might be a little hard to roll because it's got a flat bottom. A paper holder? That is, yeah. A bottle shaker? I like it. A worry bead? Indeed. I use it, I sit here and spin it on the desk just to mess around with it. It could be a futuristic, I forget what they're called, but outside a barber shop, you see those big spiral thingies. This could be one of those in the future. A top, yep. A magnet. Kira, come up with a use that people haven't said already. What could this be?
Your version of a rubber duck.
My version of a rubber duck. Sadly, this thing is heavy. It will sink. But it could be a sinking duck. I don't know what it's sinking about, but it's sinking about something. A fake boob. This is a child-friendly show. Shh. A fidget spinner. Yeah. I fidget with this thing a lot. A stress ball. Definitely. A toy for a baby. Yeah, big enough that there's no choking hazard, thankfully. A massage? Oh, yeah. A computer mouse? Definitely. Baseball metal version? Oh, yeah. A robot from Star Wars? Yeah. Lucasfilms. Here. This is the next BB-8. You're seeing it right here, right now. A speaker? Oh, yeah. Right there. There is 30, 40 different uses that we thought of for this thing. And they go on and on. There is no right or wrong answer because you know what? We've played this game with objects that none of us actually knew what the heck it did or what it did. We just found it in a drawer and we said, hey, what is this thing? It doesn't need to be anything crazy though. It can be something as simple as a little desk toy. But it gets you creative. It gets you thinking in a very, very creative and non-linear way. Because, yeah, you can say it's just a little desk toy. But it can be so much more than that. It can be whatever we want it to be. And the end of the possibilities is simply where we run out of ideas. And every time you do this, you're going to get a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit more creative at figuring out the different things that it could be. So this is an amazing game that is incredibly easy to play with friends or family. But if you don't have the time or if you're just looking for something simple that you can do with a kid while you're driving to A, pass some time for you, B, pass some time for the kid, and both of you get some practice. I'm going to use an example of a game that my parents played with me that most people, this is usually the divergent thinking exercise that they are familiar with or that they've done. Whenever I wanted something, new PlayStation, Xbox, new game, or anything like that, my parents would always ask me, give me 5 ways that you could earn the money to pay for it. Even small games like this are gonna, when you say 5 or even 10, let's say, if you're getting real adventurous, you're gonna get through the obvious. Well, you can do a lemonade stand, you can walk the dog, or you can mow the lawns. And you're gonna start getting pretty creative by the end. You could go out and you could recycle bottles. You could go and tutor math at the local elementary school. You can play piano out in a a park for friends or for people passing by. There are so many different ways that you could make the money to buy whatever it is. And the minute you get past the, lemonade stand, walking the dog, mowing the lawns, that is when things get really creative. So, you can rob some money from the bank. This is a child-friendly webinar here. That is illegal. Let's try and keep things on the legal side of the fence here. But it gets you thinking. And it gets you thinking creatively. Remember how I said before, you can break through the assumptions, but the rules, they're kind of there, or the laws rather, we shouldn't break those. Yeah, that kind of falls into that territory. Don't break the law, please. Now, as much as this has been fun, and as much as we've enjoyed getting to talk about the importance of lateral thinking and the fun of practicing it, let's get back into the world of investing for a minute here. Lateral thinking as an investor is an incredibly, incredibly important resource and skill to have. Because very rarely does investing have a multiple choice question that there is 3 wrong answers and 1 right answer. Because when we're looking at what to invest in, the number of choices are in the thousands. What price do we set the alert at? Do we buy it? Do we sell it? How much do we buy? How much do we sell? Which chart do we look at? Do we look at this strategy or that strategy or this one? So we can use lateral thinking. Instead of thinking that there's only one correct answer, we could filter down a list of companies and decide what type of analysis to do. Or we can look at some other articles and see what industry professionals are looking at and all of this kind of thing. We can also use lateral thinking to figure out what's happening in the market. To give you an idea, when a stock goes down in price, it is very easy to just say, well, it went down in price because stocks go down sometimes. Or it went down because I made the wrong choice. If we use lateral thinking, not only does that simple right or wrong answer go away, it's not, I got the wrong answer because stocks go down sometimes. It's looking at it and saying, okay, let me think of 3 reasons that that stock could have gone down. And starting to research and figuring out what were or could be 3 reasons that that stock went down. You might not find 3 correct answers, but it's going to make you start looking. It's going to make you stop or start questioning. And in the process, sometimes you're going to find maybe the reason the stock price went down is that a competitor came out with a new product, or that they just announced their earnings and that the earnings weren't what they were supposed to be. There are so many different things that happen in the market that you won't figure out if you're just looking at the price. A great example that Sectors Made Simple subscribers will know and remember is on Tuesday. I gave a webinar on the September slump, is what I called it. In that webinar, we talked about some of the reasons that the market is acting the way it is at the moment. Last week was a very not positive week for the S&P 500, but the entire market. So we went beyond the obvious, the market is having a bad week. Yeah, no duh. Anyone that can open up Google Finance could tell you that it had a bad week. So instead, we looked at some of the different reasons, some of the market reasons, some of the economic reasons, some of the policy reasons that this current slump is happening. Now, going to the end of that presentation, did it give us a concrete reason? Did I say, and this right here is the reason? No. There was not one right answer to say, this right here is the reason why the market went in the toilet. But what it did do is it gave us a lot of information of how we can look at the market, how we can get a better idea of what the market is doing, and understanding the whole story. Because if you're just looking at, did you get the answer right or wrong, you're going to be disappointed when you find out. It's going to be very hard to know if the answer is right or wrong. And you're also going to end the entire thing there, when that's being inside the box. We need to break outside and think outside the box. And that's what lateral thinking is. It is thinking outside the box, and it is so much more than just an answer. It is an entire way of thinking. It is a way of approaching any problem. Because like I said before, in the real world, very rarely is a question or a problem a right or wrong, or a this or that, or an A, B, C, or pick all that apply kind of question. Oftentimes, we need to come up with the choices of what the answers could be, and the answer by ourselves. So because of this, becoming more creative with our choices will not only allow us more options, but more creative and unique choices to choose from. It lets us look at a lot more information because we're not worried about, how do I get everything down to a single point? We're not worried about finding the answer. It's not about the destination, people always say. It's about the journey. I'm not much for prophetic things like that, but you know what? Yeah, it's kind of true. It's not about what the end answer is. It's about your thought process of how you explored everything that it could be and how you came up with that cool idea. My mom just said another great example. I went to a tennis camp when I was in high school, and there was a pizza place. I love pizza. Did then, still do now. But buying a slice of pizza from that place was about $5 per slice. That's pretty expensive. So instead of spending $40 for 8 slices of pizza, what I would do is I would buy an entire pizza for $25. And then I would sell those slices of pizza to my friends. I would sell 6 of those slices. So if I sold 6 slices for $4 each, that's $24 right there. So I ended up getting those extra 2 slices of pizza for $1. Not a bad deal, right? Creative thinking like that of, I don't want to spend $5 for 1 slice of pizza. How can I get my costs down? Realizing that instead of paying $5 for 1 slice, I can get an entire pizza for $25 and then sell some of the other slices to my friends. They get a great deal because if they only bought 1 slice of pizza, they would have paid $5. So they're getting $1 off their slice of pizza, and in return, I get 2 slices for $1. Pretty good, right? Free pizza. So, what are the takeaways here? While school, yes, is necessary. This is not me saying, don't go to school, school is useless. No. School is incredibly useful in organizing ourselves and organizing our thoughts and making us have some structure. It hurts us when it comes to creativity. Creativity is expressed not through answering a question that someone already knows the answer to. It's not through painting the same painting that everyone else has ever done. It's about being creative, doing the thing that no one else has done or has even thought about doing. And getting creative and having fun with it. Because it is an important skill in your education, in your career, in your investments, but in your entire life. It is not a skill like memorization and recitation where you just you practice it and you learn it so that you can do it in your real life. No, you're never going to have to memorize and regurgitate information in real life. Most of the time, you're going to be asked, think of an answer to this question that no one else has been able to solve. And it allows us to find these answers that no one has thought of. It allows us to stand out amongst the crowd. Whether it be at your job, you can differentiate yourself from the others that are just going with the safe choice. In school, it can help differentiate you between you and the 10,000 other people that applied to that school. And let me tell you the fun part. You're never too old or too young to start or even continue thinking laterally and creatively. It is something that is incredibly valuable, incredibly easy to do, because you can already, the first exercise I have for you all, this is your homework. Think of something that you already do in your life that could benefit from lateral thinking, can benefit from you looking at it and saying, instead of finding the right answer, I'm just going to explore all of the different answers, right, wrong, left, or right. Because I'll tell you this, if there's one thing I've learned through lateral thinking, it's a heck of a lot of fun. It is super, super fun to think and always challenge yourself to learn more, understand more, and to continue coming up with the things that no one else has or can. Remember, this is not you doing something that everyone else can do. Most people will never be exposed to lateral thinking in their lives. It's just going to be something that they might do a little bit in the background. But the more and more schooling we do, the more and more we follow those kind of guidelines that school gives us, the less and less creative we think. So I encourage you all to think creatively, think laterally. Come up with some fun games for yourself, because coming up with those games for you, for your kids, or for your family is an exercise in lateral thinking in itself. So I would love to hear from you all. Send me an email if you come up with any fun games or any fun examples of how lateral thinking has helped or you are implementing it in your lives, because this again is something that I use every day in my job, in my personal life, everywhere. It is incredibly fun and engaging to always approach something with an element of creativity and a way of figuring out how it can be made simpler, not by taking the easy way out, but by exploring all of the different possibilities of what it could be and going with the one that seems to make the most sense, regardless of if it's right or wrong. If you're going to be wrong, at least be wrong confidently, all right? That's not a recommendation. That's just an opinion. But thank you all so much for joining for this very different but incredibly important webinar to have. This is a skill that I think everyone should practice and learn, and one that, until you're aware of it, you would never think about. It's kind of funny how lateral thinking, thinking outside the box, requires you to start by thinking outside the box. But thank you all so much for joining today. If you have any questions, or if you want to share your stories about lateral thinking, send us an email at support@sectorsmadesimple.com. We would love to hear from you. And until next Friday, thank you all so much, and we'll see you all very, very soon. Take care.